In this video, I really just want to briefly discuss the idea of privacy. So the very first thing to address is this question of what is privacy and how do we understand it? There's been actually a lot of disagreement and discussion about this idea over the course of the last few decades, and even actually since the advent of newspapers and other kinds of broadcast media as well. What I think we should do is kind of focus on a really rough working definition of privacy that I think captures a lot of our intuitive ideas about what privacy is. And it's a really simple statement that privacy is just our ability to control information about us and access to us. So that's going to be the working definition of privacy that we're going to be playing around with in this class. Having said that, I think it's really important from an ethical perspective to think about the reasons why we care about privacy. I tend to think that most of the discussions about the value of privacy, like what privacy is for and why we care about it, tend to center on four kinds of considerations. The first consideration is just privacy is really connected to our own security. So our ability to control information about ourselves and to control access to us seems really connected to our ability to keep ourselves safe, both from different kinds of informational harms, like we wouldn't want to be victims of identity theft. We wouldn't want our personal information stolen and have somebody steal our credit cards and, go on a shopping spree that we would be responsible for. So that's one way in which we can be harmed by the kinds of information that can be circulated around us. We also want to be able to control access to us. So for instance, if I take a picture on my phone while I'm out with friends and I post it to social media, I may not want the sort of geographical location, the physical information that's often included in metadata to be available through different kinds of social media platforms, because I might not want people to be able to track me down, right? I may not want it to be the case that even though I'm out to dinner with friends, that anyone could just know where I was at a given time. So in those sense, I think privacy is really clearly connected to our ability to keep ourselves safe from different kinds of perceived harms. And so that's going to be connected to this idea of security. The second reason that we care about privacy is connected to the idea of free speech, which is interesting because we're going to talk about tensions with privacy, like privacy and free speech, as we move on in different sort of iterations of this video. But one of the things that's really interesting about that is that in some sense, if I think that what I'm saying or maybe what I'm reading or the kind of speech that I'm listening to or, have access to is constantly being monitored or I'm being surveilled, I may act differently simply because I'm concerned that maybe this will sort of get out of the immediate circle or the sort of immediate context that I'm in such a way that, it could be the case that it's really infringing on my ability to be authentic, right? So it's a chilling kind of component. If I don't feel like I have sort of safe spaces or private spaces where I can say what I think or read what I want or investigate, in some sense, my ability to express myself and also access other kinds of content about the world is limited. So that's going to be the third reason why we think that privacy is important, because otherwise you have people who are really kind of self-censoring or kind of thinking a lot about their own behaviors and activities and how those would be perceived more widely. And that can be a good thing or a bad thing, and there can be, negative consequences associated with that as well. The next idea is actually very closely related to that, which is sort of this ability to sort of experiment in living and the ability to explore aspects of our identity. So this is obviously closely related to this kind of worries about chilling effects on our ability to express ourselves. But if we don't have the ability to be private, it is less likely that we're going to be able to sort of explore different components of our identity. There are some really important values to anonymity and creativity that people have begun to sort of explore. And those can be really damaged when people don't feel that they have a sense of privacy. The final value in privacy, and I think this is particularly important, is the idea that privacy is really essential to relationships and intimacy. And this happens in two different related ways. So the first is that if I don't have privacy, it's really difficult for me to, say, divide my life up into different kinds of spheres. So I may act very differently with my, say, running buddies than I would with, say, my colleagues at work. And that's not necessarily because there's something, problematic about the way I behave in either context, but simply because, one context is a professional context, and in the other context, I'm just hanging out with my friends. And both of these aspects of my identity are actually quite important, but it may be important to me to kind of divide my life up into different kinds of spheres and sort of maintain boundaries between those elements and aspects of my life. Without privacy, creating those kinds of boundaries can be really hard to do. The next aspect of privacy in relationships is its connection with intimacy. I like to think about intimacy and its connection with privacy as a kind of sort of gift of access. So if you take probably the relationships that are most salient in my life, so my relationship with my partner, my relationships with my best friends, my relationship with my mom, one of the things that distinguishes those relationships is how much they know about me and how much I share with them. That, my relationship with my mom or my best friends or my partner, it's really about the fact that I trust them. And part of the way that I sort of demonstrate that I trust them and they demonstrate that they trust me is that we talk a lot about our lives and we share some of those details about how we're feeling about things or about what's happening in our lives that we wouldn't necessarily want everyone to have access to, right? Part of what makes certain kinds of relationships in our lives special is that people have different levels of knowledge about us and how we're feeling about things. So if we have everything just kind of hanging out there on the internet, it can be harder for us to distinguish between sort of what kinds and what sort of deep levels of intimacy we have with different kinds of people. So those are the 4 ways that privacy is sort of generally conceived of to be valuable and sort of our working definition of what privacy is.